Hi, I'm Tony Mejia, site pastor in Forest. And if you're new, part of Vitalpoint Church, or you're still trying to figure all of this out, welcome. Have you ever let the anticipation of something get to you or consume you? I want to let you know that I'm a great rapper. No, not that kind of rapper, but a rapper of gifts. I get the crispiest creases and the fluffiest bows. You probably don't believe me. Let's actually turn on that Mission Impossible music and I'll show you. We don't have time for that. So let me just quickly tell you about how I became a great rapper. When I was first married, my wife would wrap my presents early and she would put it in a certain spot and she would say, "Don't look at it." And then the thoughts began to consume my mind. What did she get me? Is she gonna overbuy? Is she gonna outdo me with these gifts? So I had to look. So I went in and began to peek. I know, you're about to judge me about this, but I've grown a lot since then. But I literally would unwrap it and begin to memorize how the paper was cut, how it was folded, how it was taped. I would do this for years. And I even convinced a friend to tell my wife, to convince her to take back some of those gifts that I didn't even want. Horrible, I know. But how about you? What do you do when you're consumed with thoughts? Sometimes we read through the Bible and we have these moments where we kind of see what the people are doing. You're like, really? Is that honestly what you're going to do? We kind of poke fun at them or even make them as cautionary tales. But I've learned over the years to ask this question: God, do you see this in me? This has helped me to explore and grow in faith. It's also helped me to begin to experience what God has for me, some freedom that I didn't even know He had for me of things that I've been enslaved by. So as we read the text today, we're going to look at this and ask that question: God, do you see this in me? Because we're continuing our series in Exodus and Jesus. We're at the part where God has taken them out of Egypt. They are now they're in the Exodus, and they are encountering their newfound freedom. So everything should be fine, right? We're going to go back to Exodus chapter 16, verses 1-3, and we're going to break them out today. This first verse is actually the whole aha moment for us, and you'll see as we read. It says this: the whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin. That's not Las Vegas, by the way. Where is this? It's between Elim and Sion, and in the 15th day of the second month after they had escaped Egypt. Amazing, right? Let me explain. See, again, God has taken them out of Egypt, and they have escaped slavery. And where they are right now is this in between, where they were and where they're headed. They're in this in-between, this place of unknown, this place of hunger, this place where you're consumed of what is next. This text actually tells us they're only 1 month into their journey. So let's be honest. They're probably not starving at all. They're probably experiencing some hunger, sensations, but they're not without. But the thought could have came up in their minds, begin to consume, is this enough? What we have isn't enough for what is next. These kind of thoughts begin to consume their minds, and they're starting thinking, man, we're going to die out here. It kind of sounds ridiculous, right? Because God has brought them out of slavery, and now He's just going to let them die? So we got to ask the question: God, do you see this in me? See, there is a difference between being nervous and being consumed with the thought of anticipation. Nervous means that you care. So you care about the results, you care about the conversation, the moment, whatever it is. But when you're consumed with these thoughts, it's not that you don't care. It's that you're stuck in this thing which sucks all the joy and all the energy out of you. You might have this experience. You might know exactly what I'm talking about, because here we have these people and they're going through this difficult time. They're being led through this unknown place, and they have these consuming thoughts of what could happen next. Rather than trusting God and the plans that He has for them, they're in this place where they're just like, what if? How often do we go to those places of what if? What if this happens? What if they don't pull, their weight or this or that? So what's amazing about this is that God has things for us. He has a better way for us where we can anticipate his presence, which overrides anticipating the daily pressures of our lives, because God calls us into this. And as we explore this thought a little bit more, let's go to Psalm 5, verse 3. And this is what it reads. "O Lord, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch." We got our answer there. You just got to wake up early in the morning. We're good, right? No, this is one of those descriptive texts, not a prescriptive text. So it's describing something. Even though in the morning, sometimes you wake up with these consuming thoughts that are just overtaking you. What he's actually mentioning there is some intentional actions. This action of sacrifice or surrendering or handing over our consuming thoughts to God. But it also says to watch, to wait. In other words, to anticipate God and who he is and what he can do. These intentional acts are things that we can do daily. And that sounds great, but there's more. Because before Exodus 16 and Exodus 15, we have God's people and they are literally praising, they're singing, they're having a great old time. And now in 16, they're complaining. Anyone know someone that can switch that quick? Yeah, we're going to go to verse 2 and see a little bit more here. It says this. "And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness." There's approximately 2 million people that were a part of this Exodus. 2 million people. I don't even know how I can imagine this, that 2 million people can agree on something. My wife and I can't even agree on takeout, and there's only 2 of us. But 2 million people are all agreeing together, and they're in this place of fixation of the past. Everything that they've ever known, and they all can relate. Hey, it was good back then. I loved it back then. Man, I was full back then. And the anticipation of what could happen is really stirring and beginning to affect them even more. It wasn't really the struggle of the desert. It was that struggle of going through this, but they all had this shared experience, this shared moment. And they do something that I highly recommend everybody to do, is that you go to someone and talk. But sometimes, let's be honest, we'd rather go to the people that are going to validate our consuming thoughts. Sometimes we'd rather go to someone who will validate it, who will recognize exactly what we're thinking and begin to put us into these places where we both, instead of being free, begin to spiral down together. That's what happens sometimes. And that's exactly what's happening in this Exodus moment, is that they're all spiraling down because they're all coming to a place of agreement. And sometimes we fall into the same trap. We fall into this same trap where it's all about what we are consumed in our thoughts. All these things. Yet God calls us to something new, right? So we go, God, what do you see? Do you see this in me? Because this is not about ignoring situations. This is not about ignoring concerns. This is about not ignoring God. Philippians 2, verses 14 to 16a reads this. "Do all things without grumbling or disputing." God bless us. But it says this, "And you may be blameless and innocent children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of God." You turn on the TV, you go on social media, you talk to a Leafs fan, and there is grumbling. You can even ask yourself, does the world even need my grumbling? Do I even need that? So what do we do with this? we can have an anticipation that can bring real transformation in our lives, where we can take our grumbling, the process of, the grumbling that happens in our lives, we begin to process it and anticipate that God of the universe recognizes what I'm going through, and he can renew my mind. He can renew my thinking. He can renew that way of acting out, because that's exactly what happens. If our minds are stuck in this place of consuming thoughts, it affects how we live. Just think about Paul. He lived in a corrupt and crooked world too. He had every excuse to complain and grumble about it. Sure, he spoke into things. Sure, he said stuff, but it wasn't about that. He began to transform his mind through Jesus by allowing the hope and the peace that he provided for him to be his focus. And here we are today, living in what we could seem as a corrupted and crooked and cruel world. Yet we find ourselves complaining. We find ourselves grumbling. As I'm going through this process of allowing God to transform my grumbling, I've discovered and realized that I can't just stop complaining and stop grumbling. Like literally, this is not about silencing frustrations. This is not about not saying negative words. Otherwise, a vein will pop out in my head. It would just be completely frustrating and it would just go downhill. It's about an anticipation. The real transformation comes from anticipation that God will renew my mind as I trust in him, as I put my focus not on the consuming thoughts of what could happen, what if, and what this or that, but trusting that there is a God and he is with me and that he is also working. Because Paul literally is going through this process. He's going through that, has all the reasons to have excuses, not an ideal world that he lives in sharing the gospel, but he chooses to trust God. And a lot of times we can go through this time and think, man, I don't know if I can stop. Because here we're not ignoring situations. We're not ignoring concerns. It's not that these difficulties just disappear. But what happens is that we become transformed by the renewing of our minds, and it leads us into actions that are more about what God has for us. Because God begins to replace our consuming anticipation of what could go wrong with an anticipation of what God is doing in us. And so let's look at one more thing as we point to Jesus. And it says this in verse 3. And it would be better if we had just stayed in Egypt. At least there we had food to eat, but now you've brought us here to die of hunger. Man, they were remembering the good old days. They remember when their stomachs were full and they were going back to the security of what they felt they had in Egypt, and they forgot about them being enslaved. Sounds a little bit ridiculous, doesn't it? So we ask the question, God, do you see this in me? And we do this sometimes when life is very difficult. Or when we go through moments and times of uncertainty or what if, we go, man, it was good back then. I had such a great time. Remember how it was? But like God's people, we could forget. We could forget that back in the day, we had struggles. Back in the day, there were things to complain about, grumble about. We might actually be in the place that back in the day we were hoping to be at. And now we're continuing the cycle of grumbling and complaining and not finding any satisfaction in what we're living in. Just like God's people, we can focus on being in this place of I'm without, where we're missing out. That God is actually here and with us and providing what he has for us. So you got to hear me out. This is not about just like things that are instantly going to change. This is not about like this really quick transformation. These are real life moments where we say, God, like this is hard. I don't know where we're going. I'm consumed with these thoughts. but we don't want to allow the fear of what is ahead to make us wish that we're back into a place that wasn't as good as we remember. Because God calls us to this place here and now. And he has us in these moments where we can experience this freedom. Maybe it's experience this exodus in our own lives that he's called us to. Because despite God's people and their complaining, despite their grumbling, despite all the things that they were saying out loud and scheming and blaming, at this time, God did not punish them, but God provided for them. And some of this stuff that we've been talking about today, you're like, man, this sounds like me. You understand, this is not a place and time right now of God punishing you. This is a place and time of God showing what he provides for you and I. Because as we read through this, we saw that God actually does provide for them, that he provides the substance. We see that through the manna, through the quail, that God does provide. Up to the sixth day, he was giving each and every day, and up to the sixth day, he doubles it. And so that they didn't have to get any on the seventh. They always had enough. And that's what God was teaching them. What was enough? Teaching them what sustains. But, that was something that's difficult to learn. So we asked the question, God, do you see this in me? Do I need to learn and be taught by you? Because Jesus actually would repeat this in Matthew chapter 6, verse 34. He says this, don't worry about tomorrow. Easier said than done, right? For tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day will have its enough trouble of its own. Rather than being consumed of the what ifs or what if there's enough and all these kind of stuff, we can anticipate that God can provide what we have here and now. And that was an invitation that God gave to his people. Trust me, I will provide. It's going to look like things that will sustain you. If God would do that for his people back then, he would do for us now, saying, hey, I will sustain you and provide for you. But this is an invitation for this. Because a lot of times we go into these consuming anticipation, which we feel like is necessary, will help us to get through what we're going through. But the consuming anticipation isn't necessary. Because us anticipating what God has for us is that he will anticipate what is the necessities of our lives. He provides the necessities, what we need, what will sustain us. And that is hard to stomach sometimes. God's people actually said, when were getting the manna and the quail, they said, what is this? And that is such a fair question to ask. It's a question that God wouldn't even kind of push off. It's such a fair question to start conversations, to explore and grow in faith, is asking God, what is this? Because the more that we ask God these questions, the more that we allow God to invite us into these moments, into his presence, the more that we see who he is. This Bible teaches us of letting go of the things that fill our minds. So if God's people had to trust him, so do we. And that's actually how one of the ways that Jesus taught his disciples how to pray in Matthew chapter 6, verse 11. He says this, give this day our daily bread. This day, our daily bread. Our anticipation could be God will provide daily, because the daily anticipation of the presence of God can override the anticipation of the daily pressures that we are under. And this isn't just like a, hey, like life is easier. Hey, this is like a biblical story or just this historical event. This is actually a connection that we see from Exodus all the way to Jesus. This connection of who Jesus is and what he provides. The people of Jesus' time actually began to ask him, hey, if you know God or you are God, let's see a sign. Like the people in the wilderness needed manna, show us. And Jesus says, hey, I'm the bread of heaven. He is the bread of heaven. He actually says it in John chapter 6, verse 35. He says this, and Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. I want to take this moment and just lean in a little bit. This thought of never hungering and never thirsting. I don't know about you, but when I have consuming thoughts, nothing ever satisfies it. It's like this gnawing pain, and you keep trying to feed it. You're like, I'm going to have this self-help. Maybe I'm going to read this. I'm going to go in this process. It just never begins to help because the thought is just continually consuming. And God says, hey, I actually would like you to hand this over and begin to focus on what I have for you, because it's not about God ignoring these situations. It's about us not ignoring him and the work that he has for us. And God's people got exactly what they needed, what they physically needed, even though they may have thought they wanted more. If God would provide what they needed, then God would provide for our greatest longings, spiritually, emotionally, our physical needs. And he invites us into that, into what he has for us, because he does give us what we need, and he does give us what will sustain us. But it's that question, what is this? Because a lot of times we're like, God, have you seen my financial situation? God, have you seen that letter that I got in the mail? God, have you seen my family? Have you seen this? And now I'm waiting for you to provide. Can I offer some ways that daily bread can look like? Some days it's strength to get help. Some days it's wisdom to stop something and start something. Some days it's that daily gift of peace. Some days it's courage to face what is ahead and what is unknown. Some days it's grace to forgive what seems impossible. Some days it's patience to wait when we want to just rush ahead. Some days it's comfort when we're grieving. Some days it's clarity when we are totally confused and consumed in our thoughts. Each and every day, God provides what we need, not always what we want, but what sustains us. His provision is never too late, but always with purpose, where we can begin to let go of those hunger pains, let go of the things, of the consuming thoughts of what ifs, and begin to trust in him more. But again, these are daily intentional actions that we give out to him. So I want to ask you today, will you trust God with your consuming thoughts? I want to ask you today, will you hand over those consuming thoughts and trust him with what he is daily providing for you? I've experienced a lot of this in my life. I've even come to moments in time where I've had to really dig in and just trust in God. Both of my children were in and out of the hospital early on in their lives. And I have a lot of God stories, but let me tell you, it didn't seem like they were God stories. Like this one time, my son was having surgery, and 6 weeks prior, he had a procedure. So we go to the procedure, and everything that could go wrong went awful, like awful. To a place where my son never wanted to go back. We didn't even want to send him back. But we knew he had to get to that surgery. So we did everything that we could. Began to coach him, began to speak to him and process things. We began to, bribe him. We tried everything that we could do, but he was at the place where he's like, no, I'm not going back there. And we were praying at the same time. And all of a sudden, my wife got this prompting. In other words, this impression. It wasn't audible, but it was this thought that was placed by God that brought her so much peace and brought me peace, is that he would walk through the doors, that my son would walk through the doors. And you would think because God had made this promise that I wouldn't have this consuming thoughts of what if, what could happen. But that's exactly what happened. There was this wrestling that was happening, this struggling that was happening back and forth. It's like, no, God said this, but I could do this and that. There are things that God led me to do, but it was that I wasn't stuck in a place of being consumed with thoughts, but it was about trusting in God and the provision that he had. So the day happened. This was during the time where only one parent could go in. So I go to drop them off and my wife gets them through the front doors and I just start praying like crazy. God, get them through the doors. God, get them through the doors. I'm just going. And he turns around, looks at my wife and says, Mommy, I be brave today. And he walks through those doors and he did so well through the surgery, through the recovery. He was so focused. Even so that the doctor, as he was leaving, the surgeon, he turned around and he was like, hey, I just got to tell you that your son did well. God knew what he was going to provide and what was going to happen. But it didn't mean that there wasn't a struggle and wrestling of the consuming thoughts that could happen in our lives. So I want to offer to you this question. Because as we're going through this Exodus story, this is not just like an historical event, this biblical moment. This is actually a connection to Jesus. This is actually a mirror into our lives where we ask God, do you see this in me? And what do you want to provide in my life? So I want to ask you that question. Will you hand over your consuming thoughts to God and receive what he provides for you today? Because this is not just a one and done. God says that this is daily. So this will take a daily struggle, which is well worth it. But we're all invited to these intentional actions. Will you give your consuming thoughts to God?